honor to meet our nephew, Steve Biko, sir. We're honored to meet other forces throughout this area of the world. Pan-Africanism is very misunderstood and very misinterpreted throughout the world. But we won't speak about that tonight. We've been asked to step in and say a few words about the enslavement of African people in other parts of the continent. I'm sorry, I'm accustomed to shouting.
Just carry on the live. If I'm exhausted completely, I would say no.
Every inch of Africa has known slavery. Every inch of Africa, not just West Africa or the southern part of our home, our motherland. It is known two forms of slavery. Slavery internal to Africa before the Europeans came, before the Asians came, going back to the 1400 BCs with the ancient Asiatic tribes of the East Coast and other forces who came into North Africa. North Africa was enslaved. When Hannibal's forces in Carthage were defeated by the Roman and Greek imperial empires, 30,000 Africans were sold into slavery in Greece. Every inch of Africa has known slavery. And every enslavement of African people must be remembered. Must be remembered. Not just the enslavement of those of us who were unfortunate to get caught because we fought. We fought. We were simply conquered, we were simply enchained, and we were simply transported to that part of the world, the so-called transatlantic slave trade. And at any moment, more Africans were transported from the southern part of Africa to the Americas than so-called West Africa. Don't forget Brazil. Don't forget Brazil, which is tonight the second, if not the first, largest concentration of African people outside of our continent. Well, it is the largest. It competes with Nigeria, and whether it is the largest or the smallest. So let us move to see Africa, not just a part of Africa. North Africa has known slavery. North Africa has known all forms of slavery, including barbarian enslavement of our people. And if my high school history is a little bit correct, the barbarians came from this general part of the world. The barbarians of this coast, the Franks, the Gauls, you name it, all of them came to Africa and enslaved us. Our brother spoke of 27 million people today who are suffering from slave-like conditions and practices. North Africa. North Africa is one of those places where that numbers, you didn't speak about where those 27 million people, came from. Eastern European women being trafficked into sex slavery into Germany. It's part of that 27 million of the people who are facing enslavement or slave-like practices today. We spoke about the children, especially on the cocoa farms of West Africa, so that you can have German chocolate and Nestle's Cafe and all of that in schools in Chicago. The enslavement of African children in Ivory Coast and under the cocoa belt in West Africa. But you also have the camel jockeys. The camel jockeys of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, young boys who are once again being trafficked into slavery into North Africa, into the Middle East. We don't want to spend a lot of time, and we cannot pretend to know the details and the history of all of these areas of Africa and the world. We must remember. We must remember the enslavement of all of our people, because Africa is one continent. I'm an enchromist. There is no such fiction as north of Africa and south of the Sahara. I'm a secularist. There's no confusion in our mind that our mother is one. Is one.
Right.
And therefore, we must be concerned about all of our mother's children. All of our mother's children, not just ourselves. But we are also internationalists. The Irish were enslaved. St. Patrick, they run around Chicago throwing green in the lake and getting drunk, celebrating that aspect of so-called Irish culture. But they forget that St. Patrick was also a slave, and that when he ran away and sought his freedom, he dedicated his life not just to the conversion of Ireland to Catholicism, but to also liberating Irish. And when William the Conqueror rolled into England, 1/7 of the population were enslaved. There are discussions around the world, because we are internationalists, about how all of these forces in all of the world who have suffered their own particular forms of enslavement can come together to stop the crimes that are being committed, the enslavement of people today. Kwame Ture Stokely Carmichael once said, we can talk about historical slavery and reparations and all of that, and we should. But if we do not stop the crimes that are being committed against people of the world today, we condemn future generations of African and other youth in the world to become perpetual beggars for reparations, perpetual beggars to remember crimes that are being committed today and crimes committed against people historically. We are sorry that the government to give us details about what historically has happened, what is currently is happening in Mauritania as one place. We've had discussions with this so-called Arab Spring in North Africa. We visited, we spoke to forces in every one of the countries in North Africa and the Middle East. This issue of the so-called Arab, and we prefer to call it the trans-Mediterranean, trans-Indian Ocean, other stuff. I mean, if they can call the transatlantic and not the European, not the Catholic, not the Jewish enslavement of our people, and we can stop this nonsense about Arab enslavement, Muslim enslavement, and discuss the real question: reactionary elites, reactionary classes inside of every sector of society, including African society, who have historically and continue to commit these crimes. We were asked at the last minute, we're sorry we're rambling, but this conference here is very important. There are Pan-African Congresses being discussed and planned in every region of the world. Sometimes 2 and 3 conferences in the same country for next year. The clarity which this Congress will bring to that discussion and debate is much needed, because there is much confusion in the Pan-African movement today masquerading as clarity. You have a day tomorrow. It's a long day, a long day. We don't intend to spend no more time tonight, because you have to go home, you have to eat, you have to get up right, and you have to come back tomorrow and hear presentations and ask questions and come up with your resolutions and your recommendations for future struggles. I tell you, as an African who has spent 50 years in the struggle, when Steve Biko's older brother and 3,000 to 5,000 other youth were arrested in Azania, South Africa in '63, 2 million of us were in the streets at the same time as high school students, 250,000 in Chicago, 785 demonstrations in 186 cities in 1963. 1963 represented the year that the high school and the elementary school students entered the African Revolution in every corner, in every country in the world. And Steve Biko, if you remember, as one of the best of the baby boom generation who remember, who resist, who rebel, who revolt, and still fight for revolution. We thank you.